those who don't know me, my name's Stephen Keeney. I run a small YouTube channel that pertains to boxing, Muay Thai, and martial arts. So, I've been putting a lot of long form content up on top of the tutorials and small shorts that I'm doing. And it seems that I get good feedback when I post these long in-depth videos. And for a while, I've been wanting to post a video sort of like this, where it's almost like a single person podcast type of thing. And the topic I want to discuss is what you should do when you first start martial arts to try to get the most out of just your first year. A lot of times, the very obvious answer is go to a good gym, get a good coach, and if at all possible, get personal training, right? You can do that. If you could somehow afford personal training with a great renowned coach, then that kind of sums up the video. The only thing is, I know a lot of you aren't going to do that because a lot of you don't have the money or the resources or the time. And when it even comes to just going to a good gym, period, you may live in a certain place. And, a lot of times people will always say like, oh, if there's a will, there's a way. But the truth is, everyone's life is different. People have different living situations. They deal with different things. They're at different places in their life. It's like you're trying to build your life and you may live in a certain living situation where you have obligations and you can't always just be at, let's say, like a 6 p.m. Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu class, right? I want to try to give a good set of directions for the people that are not going to go the route of getting a personal trainer or just joining the best gym, and then kind of fill in all the different gaps and the little intricacies that you should know. You need to understand that right off the bat, there's different levels of commitment to martial arts. However, the initial commitment that you decide doesn't have to be your final commitment, okay? So that's the first thing that a lot of people get confused. A lot of people think that you need to be all in from day one, or you need to decide that you're just like a hobbyist from day one, and that's gonna dictate the rest of your life. That's not true. A lot of times, you can get into something very loosely, only do it once a week for years, and then all of a sudden get like really into it as time goes by and things start to click. So a lot of times, depending on who you train with, they may give you that vibe that, oh, like if you're serious, you need to be serious, or if you're going to mess around, get out of here. Don't mind those people, because the truth is, a lot of times, especially for those that aren't athletes prior, like myself, I wasn't really an athlete before starting martial arts. You need to get into this stuff gradually. And that's why when you see people making fun of like Taekwondo and karate and like Tiger Showman's martial arts and these chain places, don't mind them, because the truth is, when you first start, that's when you'll get the most benefit from those kind of places. If you're someone that's already like a fighter and you're forced to move or something like that, and then now there's not a lot of good gyms around you, it kind of sucks. But when you're brand new and you're not flexible, you're not strong, you're not athletic, it's like an uphill battle. A lot of times, almost any coach could benefit you in some way. But then here's the next thing you got to understand is that on one end of the spectrum, we have proven martial arts that works, like pro trainers and the stuff they preach. And you have weird martial arts gurus that never fought in their life and teach BS. But then you got everything in between. And you got to understand that most places you train are gonna fall somewhere in between. You're not always gonna have access to the best coaches in the world, and you're gonna try to stay clear of the weird places, but still understand it's like a spectrum. You see, with me, I first started training in Shotokan karate, which is a karate form. And I was very lucky that my first coach was like a really good black belt who had competed in kickboxing and PK kickboxing back in the 80s. And he was a former cop from the Bronx, New York. And he was a very good black belt. I learned a lot from him. I did karate for about a year, and I personally didn't really know much about the UFC. When I got to understanding the UFC, it kind of made me realize that the main martial arts seem to be wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or just anything grappling, Muay Thai, and boxing. Back then, that was the split, Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. Every MMA gym was set up like that. And I got lucky enough to, see Cosmo Alexander train, and he was a Muay Thai fighter going into MMA at the time. And I had this moment of realization, like, wow, like, this guy is like the pinnacle of striking and all this cool karate stuff. I really like it. But the thing is, some martial arts are just like objectively more effective than others. And one thing that really got me thinking that way was I used to watch that show called, there's two of them, Fight Quest and Human Weapon. And I remember in Human Weapon, when they would learn a certain technique, they'd have those 3D animations of the gray people. And that was like the first time I started realizing like, hey, although I'm very into this martial arts, like wishy-washy, Bruce Lee, karate stuff, at the end of the day, we're all just these like flesh meat skeletons fighting each other. So that's the thing that's good to remember, is that it's good to get into martial art and sort of you can be very proud of what you do in the martial arts virtues and the traditions and everything surrounding it. But sometimes I notice beginners, they get a little bit like infatuated and caught up, and they forget that at the end of the day, a lot of this is just hand-to-hand combat. Don't get like too, I don't want to say brainwashed, but too like closed-minded too early on. Because like I said, your first martial art, you don't know if it'll be like your final martial art. So that's one thing to keep in mind. My next stop after doing karate was I did some Muay Thai classes. I kind of learned how to throw the Muay Thai style kicks. So now I sort of had like Muay Thai and karate, but then I really got into boxing with a guy that I was very blessed to meet named John Karp, who taught me boxing. Now, John's whole background was that he was formerly living in the Bronx, New York, and he boxed when he was younger, and his best friend was a Golden Glove champion, and his best friend kind of taught him what he knew. And all these years later, at like 65 years old when he met me, I was lucky enough to get the benefit of him kind of singularly training me. So I got the boxing experience. And then training with John, having my kicking experience, and about like my 4th year training, I did my first Muay Thai fight. The thing that's important to understand about having your first fight is this. It's very important to have your first fight, whether that's under K1 rules, modified Muay Thai rules. And I say modified because there's no elbows, but nowadays I see people using elbow pads. So that's a cool thing that's been like implemented the last couple of years. And they have like some kind of modified MMA matches. There's a lot of different rule sets when you have like your first fight. But when you have your first fight, no matter the rule set, understand that never ever let a gym or a coach talk you into your first fight when you yourself don't feel ready. And I'll tell you why. Because although positive peer pressure is a good thing, and sometimes you get like very good athletes and fighters that have like confidence issues and they sort of need to like just get their feet wet to realize there's nothing to worry about. That does happen. You got to understand that like everyone has their own story of their first fight. And in my experience, I've seen people have their first fight and get like a first round knockout and they're hooked. I've seen people have like a very competitive fight, but just be so like distraught from how hard it was that they end up kind of quitting. Or some people get really badly injured. And the thing is like only like a person can tell you their experience and try to tell you that you should do what they did. But for every success story, there's tons of failure stories. And that's why personally, I don't believe that you have to ever even really fight. It's just if you choose to fight, you really want to make sure you're ready. And me personally, I was not ready for my first fight. You see, when I had my first fight, it was like very unorganized. I did what's called an unsanctioned bout, which is basically like, it's like a big fight show. Like there's hundreds of people, there's weigh-ins, there's doctors and all that stuff. But it's very like flexible. Like you might show up, the opponent might be a no-show. You might fight another guy who's from like a different weight class. They just like, there's like a 5-pound wiggle room. So I ended up fighting someone that I felt was a lot bigger than me and maybe questionably lied about the weight class, even though he said he did this weight cut. And it was a good night. And I ended up losing a decision that I actually felt like I won. So I kind of left feeling like a winner. And even though I lost, which like nowadays I would want to assess the loss more than just sort of be like, yeah, I did awesome. I don't care. Like they robbed me. Personally, I think that was like a bad attitude to have, but I was younger and dumb, right? So the thing is, the reason I say I don't believe I was ready is because although I had sparred at that point, even with professional boxers in boxing, there's something about when you have your first fight that the amount of exertion that your body will go through and the amount of adrenaline and the adrenaline dump you get and the intensity is something that seriously cannot be simulated. And I'm not like throwing shade at people, and I respect everyone for the level at which they train at. However, I will say when you have your first fight, you seriously do kind of join a club that no one else is in if they've never fought before, because there's just something about fight pace and intensity, and the pain you go through is like no other. Like you just got to experience it for yourself. My main idea is that when you get into a gym, no matter who you're training with, don't let people talk you into fighting if you're not ready. I've seen a lot of people get very hyped up because like the whole team was going to fight and there's like 7 people going. So they're just like, yeah, everyone else come. And sometimes like some people are more ready than others, you know? And then the team ends up going like 3 and 4 that night because maybe most of the people participating weren't really ready. Now, let's talk about finding a good coach and the different types of coaches out there. From what I've seen, you have different types of like coaches. Like we use the word coach as this interchangeable term. It's like some coaches will be a good coach, but they're almost in a way more of like a recruiter for people. And then you have like the sub coaches that sort of run the classes and stuff like that. And within those sort of like sub coaches and assistant coaches, I guess you could think of them, you have pad holders, which are guys that will put you through a workout, teach you a lot of combinations, a lot of good stuff like that. Then you also have, you know, guys that are like a fighter / coach, like they're helping supervise. But far and few in between, you meet teachers. Now, I'm not saying that not every coach can be a good teacher. However, I will say in my experience, a lot of the best stuff I've ever learned was like these little side notes with like the older guys that really know their stuff. Like you'll be sparring and you're in the action in between rounds. You have like the older guys telling you things that apply to what you're doing. And they drop these little golden nuggets. And sometimes it's like, you'll even get guys like my coach, John, that were very, very willing to like go through all the intricacies and stuff like that. Like a lot of you guys that enjoy my videos, I kind of got that from him. You know, a lot of times like people just give you like some quick explanation because obviously you're not paying them for personal training, but you have a lot of selfless people that love what they do. And once you get them talking, they just ramble on and they'll teach you like a lot of good stuff. So understand that you're going to meet different types of coaches and don't get like offended if they're not the most like vocal coach. Like I said, some coaches will put you through like a really good pad session and they kind of teach you like trial by fire. Then you'll have these like Kenny Weldon types that love, he's an older boxing coach, that they love to like break everything down in intricate detail. And if you're a student with the patience, get a lot out of it. Like I'm very like that. I like to train, but I love just learning different things. Even if I'm not going to use that method, I like just learning it because then I know it exists. That's the whole thing with finding a good coach. Understand not every coach is going to have it all. And when it comes to gyms, understand every gym is going to have, you know, hopefully everything you need, but some will have, you know, strengths and weaknesses. Like for example, you might have a gym where it's not like the most supervised gym, but maybe it's got a lot of people to train and spar with. Or you might find another gym where it's got like a really good coach, but it's not like the biggest gym and there's not a lot of people to spar with. And that's why a lot of times, I'll be honest, like if you get more into this within your first year, you're going to probably end up training at like 2 different places or multiple places. A lot of times the places I would get my best sparring was not where I was learning because I was learning in a YMCA basement with John. But then it would literally just be like me and him, like Mickey and Rocky or something. And then I would go up north or down south. Like I live in Westchester County, New York. So a lot of times the best sparring was like up north or you go down toward the city. That's kind of my quick little explanation for, you know, finding a gym and gym culture. Another thing that I want to touch up on is how to go from like a 0 to a hero, right? Like how is this process going to work where you're going to start out as like an absolute beginner and somehow get to the point where you're confident to get in a ring in front of hundreds of people, whether you win or lose, at least do well, okay? And the thing you got to realize is a lot of times, like everyone has a different starting point. You see, we all know that like when you get into martial arts training, and like you can apply a lot of this to jiu-jitsu, but if you've noticed, I'm kind of keeping this more striking centric. A lot of times you get into running because you want to build what's called an anaerobic base. Because you see, a lot of times, if you're someone that has never played sports before, you don't really have an aerobic base. Where if you've done some kind of sports before, you have an aerobic base. So not that running isn't required, but from the jump, you're going to be able to get more out of the classes, more out of the sessions. Now, if you're someone that's starting with no prior experience, which I like teaching people like that because I like to give them what I've never had myself. You want to do some kind of light jogging and or jump rope from the beginning, but limit it to like 3 times a week, if even that. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of times it takes a long time to build those red blood cells, and you pounding and pounding and pounding isn't going to make it go any faster, because like I said, we're only looking for an aerobic base. We're not, training for the Golden Gloves or something like your first week. However, what you do want to start to try to do is get more flexible. Like if you're not a flexible person, you've never played sports, you want to start dedicating some time to stretching, because whether you're doing boxing, Muay Thai, K1 kickboxing, karate, whatever, it's going to benefit you to stretch. In fact, a lot of gyms will sort of have a little bit of a stretching session before, during, or after the class, but you want to try to do this stuff on your own time. So you want to do some cardio and you want to do some stretching. Now, also, you want to invest your time in some kind of strength training. Now, typically there's so much stuff out there because you have like CrossFit, bodybuilding, powerlifting. The thing you want to do is, and I'm not going to give you like a black and white answer like do powerlifting or do calisthenics, but typically you want to be doing pushing, pulling, and legs. So if that's bench, squat, deadlift, a basic program, 5 sets of 5, cool. If that's just you doing like body weight squats, push-ups, and pull-ups, cool. You just want to start investing in your body, because what happens is, and this is what a lot of people don't preach, is that even though it doesn't feel like we're using strength when we box or strike, what's going on is when you're hitting these bags and these solid pads, by you doing strength training, you're building a susceptibility to injury. And also, when you start to throw these punches, you're going to get a good feel for how hard you could hit without injuring yourself. And when you invest in like a strength program, you're going to feel like you can hit harder without getting hurt. So you're just going to hit that much harder. And it's like the two of them sort of play off each other, like your ability to hit hard and how much strength you have. Now I want to talk about skill development. So the thing with skill development is that understand you're going to have a coach that's going to show you, or hopefully you're going to have a good coach who's going to show you everything. But what you should realize too is, and like a lot of people advise against this, but man, like I don't think anyone should learn on YouTube or the internet, but like, dude, you got to realize there's so much good stuff out there to supplement your training. Now, that doesn't mean that you should go and like watch like YouTube videos and argue with your coach about what works and what doesn't and ideologies. But hey, I believe on your own time, if let's say your class is only so many times a week, by all means, try to educate yourself a little bit. Watch videos, get like any kind of books on subjects, like get into this, like bring your mind into this a little. If you have a good coach, just listen to them, because usually if they have a good plan for you, like they care about your development, you don't want too many outside sources like interrupting that. And that's why even with my coach, John, like I always would blindly listen to him and let him teach me. But if I got supplemental training, I would like talk to him about it and he would tell me what he thought of it. And he's like, oh yeah, I think that's good advice. Or, I think that's okay, but I don't think that really aligns with what we're doing. It was a very good, like vocal coach-student relationship. So that's the idea with supplementing your training with like the internet per se. But one thing you could do, and this is, I would tell you 100% to do, is whether it's boxing, jiu-jitsu, K1, whatever, watch 100 matches of your sport. But I don't want you to put too much thought into it. I don't want you to like take a notebook and start writing things down. You'll do that eventually, but for now, just watch the matches, and I'll tell you why. I've met dozens of people that were gearing up for their first boxing match or K1 match or Muay Thai fight or jiu-jitsu match, where I could tell that this person, despite learning stuff in their classes, you could tell they had never watched at least like 100 matches. Their idea of what a fight looks like is wrong. It's not like rooted in realism, because remember before I was talking about like fake martial arts and real martial arts and everything in between. You see, when you watch these professional fights, you're going to see what really works at the highest level. And I remember I had a guy I was training where we were doing the switch kick into the right cross on this given day. And he went home and he took my advice and he watched like 30 glory fights in like a weekend. And he told me when he came back, he's like, hey, I saw that switch kick into the right hand a lot of times. I'm like, yeah, see, what it does is it's like, don't take the coach's advice like blindly. By all means, if you don't like trust what you're learning, go ahead and watch these fights and you'll see that stuff in these professional fights. However, it could also gauge if you got a coach that maybe you're a little iffy about. If he's showing you some stuff that sounds good on paper, but you go watch 100 fights and you never really see it pop up, doesn't mean anything, but it could be indicative that maybe these aren't like the best rooted in reality methods. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is sparring. So understand when it comes to sparring, a lot of times boxing and the striking arts like kickboxing, Muay Thai will do it very differently. You see, in boxing, a lot of times it's done in such a way where sparring is like a fight where you're going to get your mouthpiece, headgear, and boxing gloves on, and you're going to get in a ring, and you're usually going to do like a set number of rounds. Like, okay, you're with this guy, you guys are going to do 3 2-minute rounds, and that's usually how it goes. And because of the headgear and people watching and the big gloves, I hate to say it, but a lot of times like boxing sparring is kind of like a fight, but that's okay. Where when you go to like kickboxing gyms and Muay Thai gyms with like the mat space, a lot of times you do what's called round robin, where like, you go with everybody and you kind of assess how hard you go based on who you're going with. And a lot of times nobody will wear headgear, so everybody more or less goes kind of light. Or some people, they call it like hard to the legs and body, but light to the head. Like there's like different like unspoken sort of like respects you do. And the whole thing is this. I think that it's very productive to do the light sparring, but I think if you're going to go fight, you really should make sure that you do a good amount of hard sparring before you ever fight. And the reason is this, is because I've seen a lot of guys do a disservice to themselves where they train Muay Thai or kickboxing for like 2 years and they never really like headgear sparred. And then they went to a boxing gym for the first time and they looked at it like, yeah, like I know boxing, like I do kickboxing, I could box, whatever. And they had their first taste of hard sparring. And it wasn't that they got beat up necessarily, but the physical demand it took, they were shell shocked. Like they were like, oh my God, I did not know that like it could be that intense. And what ended up happening was these guys sort of like never really fought because they realized, hey, I like training and I thought I wanted to fight, but like I never want to do that again. And that's okay. Like a lot of times, like there's different levels of commitment and goals. But the thing is I like the whole idea of this video is what should you do in your first year? Definitely at some point in your first year toward the second half of the year, you want to be hard sparring, You don't want to only be doing the whole like touch sparring thing because, I've seen guys go from doing the round robin sparring to fighting in the ring with like no shin guards and headgear and they're fine. But I've also seen a lot of people that did like the sort of round robin touch sparring and go right to a fight. And whether they got obliterated or not, they were like shell shocked. Like they weren't ready for that kind of contact. Like me personally, I had like 25 fights in the park with no mouthpiece and like Modell's boxing gloves, like in the neighborhood, before I ever even did light sparring and karate and stuff like that. So for me, it's kind of sounds goofy, like, oh, like backyard boxing, but like, yo, dudes were knocking each other out. Like it was kind of crazy. Like it was good though for me to like really realize like, if you want to get into fighting, you're going to get bloody noses. You're going to, your jaw's going to hurt for 3 days. Like this stuff is tough. And usually you don't want to scare people with this kind of thing, but you got to realize it's no joke. And sometimes I notice when you go to a boxing gym, like you get in that ring, they call it like the chamber of truth. Like you're going to get in there and you're going to spar. And a lot of times when I would roll through like a gym I wasn't from, I wanted to spar because I wanted to get in there, whether it was pros or amateurs with double-digit records. And I looked at it like, even if I'm going to get pieced up right now, if I can make it to the end of these 3-minute rounds, I'm showing these guys I'm serious. I'm showing I'm a fighter. I'm not just a recreational guy. And like I said, it's okay if you're a recreational guy, but understand if you want to kind of transition from being like recreational to actually competing or even just being a guy that spars, you gotta slowly build yourself and understand that when you go from that light sparring on the mat to the freestyle sparring in the ring, it's a pretty big leap. And then when you go to fighting in an actual ring, it's like an even more massive leap. So really the last thing you want to do is only do light sparring and then just fight in the ring, okay? And a good sort of gateway between the two I've seen nowadays is they have like the point kickboxing is getting really big where it's kind of like a free fight on a mat space, like, that's kind of making a comeback. I see a lot of guys do that. And I guess it's good because it kind of teaches you how to slowly get into fighting in the ring. But I don't even feel like that's necessary personally. I think like if you go on a Saturday or Sunday off hours, whatever, and you do like a sparring session in an actual boxing ring, you're going to get the experience you need to fight in the ring. I pretty much touched on everything that I wanted to talk about. This video got a little bit long, but you know, I've been getting good feedback for these long form videos. So it's nice to know there's people still out there that have the attention span and actually want to learn this stuff in a more, you know, upfront, but like detailed way. So that's my advice. You know, that like you could talk about this stuff all day, but that's the main bulk of it. It's like, if you're new in your first year, I'll just quickly review. You want to invest in your strength and athleticism. You want to build some kind of base of aerobic and anaerobic endurance. You want to make sure that you're in a gym that it doesn't have to be the best gym, but you're learning good stuff from a good coach. And the fourth thing, you want to try to approach sparring in a very incremental way and not jump into it too fast or, you know, too slow. And then finally, if you do choose to fight, which is like the optional number 5, really just make sure you're ready and make sure you've done at least a decent amount of that hard sparring, you know, leading up to the fight. And really, that's like the best 5 things I could teach you or tell you as a beginner. You know, I take a lot of pride in teaching beginners, and the reason is because I felt like I'm able to give people what I never really received. I had a great coach, but you know, it's almost like I get the benefit of learning what I was taught and then being able to articulate the way I want to in my own way. So, you know, I hope you guys like the video. Stay tuned for more.